The first and only time I've been to Washington, D.C. was my freshman year in college when I was playing for the University of South Florida women's basketball team. We were there playing American University. And I'm trying to remember, this was relatively early into our season. Here we are in our country's capital. And you see, I had grown up with a dad who was, man, God, just learned, I felt, about all the best parts of history from my dad. Interestingly and ironically, since I became a social studies teacher myself, my social studies teachers were always the worst ones that I had. And I learned more from my dad than I did from most of my classes in this area, and especially during my middle school years. Dad shared so many details with me about this, particularly regarding the civil rights movement, which shouldn't be surprising since we grew up in Detroit, or he grew up, I was born there as well and lived there till almost 9 years old, but my parents were both born there, and both of them lived there until we moved to the suburbs in late 1984. So to become familiar with the struggle that was something I could never, ever even remotely contemplate, right? Because how can you, unless your skin color, unless something that you cannot hide a part of you. When you cannot hide a part of you that has been determined to be a grouping that is, less than in some way, like many, many groups in our country have a history of being categorized as such, whether you begin with the founding of the United States of America and the eradication, and dare I say, genocide of the Native Americans that were here, and then all the different groups over the course of all the different immigrations, the Chinese and the building of the railroads, the Irish, which a little harder to identify, although the Irish names tend to be giveaways, and certain physical appearances, but kind of hard to hide if you're black. And I learned a lot from my dad, as much as I could, and was able to empathize so much more with that struggle due to all the things that he talked about. All the teachings of Martin Luther King and all the different things that were going on in the late 50s leading up to the civil rights movement that really gained momentum in the 60s. And as I sit and watch The West Wing again, yes, for a little bit of break from work, but also as work for me, I'm taking notes. Because much like Siskel and Ebert made careers out of analyzing movies, not that I plan on making a career out of analyzing film and TV, but it certainly is relevant in our world simply because of how many people watch these shows. And I'm watching an episode now and just reminded of the time that the only time I got to go to D.C. And I remember we had to beg to go sightsee. Every road trip, man. We went to a mall. Every road trip, we'd go and take the bus to a mall and have hours to go roam around a mall, which is pretty much one of my least favorite places still to this day. But here we were staying in our country's capital, and we had to beg to go sightsee. So with one of our assistant coaches, I think there were 5 of us that went with her, and we had about an hour and a half to try to see and get a feel for the energy of this very, very powerful city with so much history. And this particular coach was black. And I remember saying I remember saying, man, I wish I would have been alive in the 60s. Just to be able to be some part of something collectively that was so important and so many people coming together to fight on behalf of, in this case again, I think more than anything, I was envisioning the civil rights struggle. And of course, kind of a naive comment, right? Not even realizing that I had a couple of my black teammates with me and my black coach who said, well, if you were our color, I don't think you would have been as eager to be living through it. And just a reminder. I'm just sitting here and reminded about how far we've come from one another, how much we don't know about one another, how ridiculous it is that we think we're getting knowledge and information that is, I dare say that's even factual, because I don't even know how factual it is in terms of what's presented to us as news and facts from our media, as opposed to actually getting out and engaging in the different communities that make up your community at large, and how necessary it is for us to get out of our bubbles, regardless of what your bubble is. And if you really want to be able to empathize and understand all the different groups of people out there, and let's begin with, why do we got to identify one another as groups? We need to get back to recognizing that we are individuals. We need to evolve beyond these labels. But in order to do that, we have to slow down. We have to take the time. We need to be present. We can create that kind of environment in which to live. The most powerful thing in my past 2.5 years, post spiritual awakening, is the amount of time I now give to living my life. I'm not, my entire first year in Seattle, I swear to you, I can count on a few fingers the number of negative interactions I had with people. Because I just, first of all, it was, I've expressed the massive amounts of positivity I was feeling. And I've said before, what you put out, you get back. So even if somebody was normally kind of a jerk to other people, I didn't get that part of them. I only experienced, it seemed, the good side of every person. And I wasn't in a rush anymore. I recognized that the value, I had finally seen the tremendous value in living in the present and the power of that present moment, and how much more rich my life became as a result of being more in the present and not constantly going after whatever I was rushing towards. Taking the time in the grocery store, taking the time at the coffee shop to actually communicate with the person in the checkout line, as opposed to being on my phone while I check out, or doing the other umpteen million things that we do, rather than engage with the people that we're crossing paths with every single day. And you would be amazed at how many people would feel that. And you could tell by their reactions. I'd be with friends at, say, Target, and they're like, how is it that people just start talking, pouring out personal things and saying crazy things to you? I said, and I didn't say anything, because I was still busy kind of observing this myself, observing the I want to say the magnificence of it, but I know that sounds like I'm over exaggerating, but it really isn't. Because it made me aware of how many of us out there are just longing so badly for somebody to actually slow down and be present in our lives and give a shit about us. And this episode that I'm in the middle of right now, episode 10, season 1, there's a homeless Korean veteran that dies in the mall. And he apparently has a jacket that Toby gave to Goodwill, and it's got Toby's business card, so they call him, and Toby can't let it go, right? He can't let it go that they're just going to basically dispose of this guy however you dispose of some homeless person with no family and nobody to reach out to. And he's determined to try to locate somebody for this man, or at least give him a proper burial. And he's in the mall and he's looking at, I don't know which monument or I don't know if it's the Vietnam Wall or what wall it is, but they don't go outside very much in this show. You don't have many outside scenes. And I was overcome as I'm watching it with the memory of my limited time in this amazing city that's in our country. And how many of us have never been there. And again, I'm not one, especially in the present day now, I've got a whole new take on focusing on our past. I mean, it used to be, and that's one of the reasons I think I became a social studies teacher, was I believed we needed to sort of drill into our kids and into others, this awareness of all these sides of the stories that were never told. I used to tell my kids, when there's a fight at school, whose side gets spread around? The side that wins, right? You never hear the loser's side. And it's the same thing with history. And it used to be that I thought the solution was to make more and more of our youth and our kids more aware of all these parts of our history that have been ignored. And now I understand that by focusing in that manner and by focusing on, because a lot of times it's highlighting all the atrocities and the injustices. And now I hold the belief, and I know what my colleagues would say, not so much the ones I taught with, because not many of those could even carry a conversation on like this, which is sad to say, but the truth. But I'm speaking specifically of the people I went to graduate school with, my old college advisor, who was a close friend, and the people, I can only imagine what they would think of my belief now, which is to focus on those atrocities and injustices. I now believe only aids in encouraging similar type energies here in the present day. It's part of the reason why we can't move beyond it. I don't claim to have all these answers to the specific things, but I know generally the goal is to recognize that none of us were alive, or none of us today were perpetuating these atrocities from our past. So the better energy, the more efficient, more positive way to approach it, in my opinion, is to figure out a different way to go forward now, to create something that's different from the times in the past and to grow from those times in the past. And I don't share this podcast now to go any further into that. It just reminded me of being in Washington, D.C., of the fact that we had to fight to go, it's like, really? We were college students. There as a privilege, really, is what I felt. I mean, I couldn't believe I was living the dream that so many kids had. It really wasn't a dream of mine to play a college sport, because when I was a kid, that wasn't anywhere near as prevalent as it's become now. Whereas now every parent's getting their kids trainers, and every parent thinks their kid's going to play a college sport, and that's the be all end all. And believe me, it's not. It's not. It's tremendous if you're able to do it and if you're happy doing so. But that experience, on so many levels, altered my life tremendously. And I know the time is quickly approaching where I'm going to begin to talk about that Division I athletic collegiate scholarship, recipient of a collegiate athletic scholarship at the Division I level, what that experience was. And it's just weird when memories pop up for me and how they're triggered. Because if you would have thought of anything as college students, we certainly should have been required. It should have been built into that trip to spend as much time in that city as possible, visiting as many memorials and things. It should have been built in, and instead we had to beg. And so I also am reminded of another story recently that was shared with me from some friends of mine that are, I'm trying to think, the number of them, they're from a number of different South American countries, mostly Colombians. I think one or two maybe from Brazil. And there was a small group of them, of these friends, that went to D.C. this past December, for a vacation. And to hear their perspective as foreigners of the power of the city was so fascinating, just fascinating. And it wasn't necessarily, their take and their perspective wasn't necessarily positive. It was just that you could sort of feel. But it was very in recognition of the energy, the very powerful energy present in Washington, D.C. And I know that I'm going to be talking a great deal about politics and about my beliefs of needing to evolve beyond politics. And I plan on just living it more than talking about it. But it's going to be a combination here. And early on, it's going to be more talking about it, because it won't be until I've got more funds, until I'm making more money with the company, that I'll be able to begin to show the different ways I think. I believe this particular new game that I reference can change the entire political landscape, because I think it'll change the part of sort of that I know Democrats, kind of generally focus on, and what upsets Republicans generally the most, and that is sort of the social welfare programs of our nation. And let's be frank, I don't think they're doing a whole lot of good. It's kind of like our nonprofits; they're not really doing and instilling all that much change in our world. And I've got beliefs and thoughts on why that is the case. But I know from my experience of working in the jails, in this female jail, I cannot wait to develop some programs to go into arenas like the jails with this type of, and I've said before, Mike Dooley has done it. Mike Dooley is one of the greatest teachers that has influenced me so far, and his course is called Infinite Possibilities. And my very close friend in St. Pete, she is in her 7th or 8th class of teaching this in this female jail, of teaching infinite possibilities to these women that have been in jail and that are preparing to re-enter the world. And it is unbelievable to watch these women take this course over and over again, and what it's done to their spirit. And what I want to do is I want to begin tracking them, and I want to begin to have a specific program designated for them as they get out into, quote unquote, the real world, because they're entering a world that never lets them forget their past. Never. And that is not the world that I live in. I live in the world of being in the present moment and going forward, and understanding that we all make mistakes. We're all growing, and we should all be aiming to continue to grow from everything in our past. And the focus should only be on the present and going forward. But that's a big shift from today's world and today's paradigm. So anyway, just a little tangent kind of podcast that I wanted to record as I sit here and remember my only hour-and-a-half visit to our nation's capital. And again, to remind people that may be listening to my political opinions coming forward in this podcast and the one that I'll be releasing on the West Wing that I recorded earlier today, that there is only respect for what's come before. There's respect, and I have very strong opinions of what we face at present. But it's just time to move beyond what is just an archaic system that is not representing the interests of the majority of Americans. And I think by going and being able to teach Americans how to rely on themselves, like true self-reliance, true responsibility, true independence and freedom, I know I have the capability of teaching that to a degree that not very many people in the world, let alone our country, have the ability to do yet. Because this is the cutting edge of this massive global awakening that's taking place. And statistically speaking, there just are not that many people yet that are, one, able to acknowledge that they feel this shift going on for fear of how they're going to be judged in their various communities that they live in their personal families, in their communities at work. God forbid if you're found out to be following some hippy-dippy new age, right? And again, with the labels. But I'm telling you, this new game can absolutely change the complete landscape of politics, because it will begin to empower the less fortunate in ways that you can't even imagine, yet. And once that begins to happen, crime will drop. I mean, it'll be a ripple effect through the entire political arena. And it's coming. It's coming very soon. Because as soon as my company begins to earn money in all the various ways that I am poised now to earn this income, it is going right back out in the community. Right back out. And I will be investing it and spending it in ways in the community that you've not seen. Certainly not to the extent from one person that I plan to do. Because I'm serious. These are the most powerful times, unprecedented times that we're living in. And if you can understand the power of our minds, and you're willing to open yours up just a little bit, you can begin to hear this message and see what I see more clearly than anything I've ever seen before.